Without further ado, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here. We have, I can't believe we have, but we do, George Chuvalo and Marvin the Weasel Elkind. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We really, really are glad you are here.
Very happy to be here.
Yeah, well, it's lovely to have you. Couple things. You have books out. You have storied careers. You both have legendary occurrences in your lives. You've had ups and downs. You've had a lot of joys and a lot of tough times as well. But the two things that you guys have in common are you are gentlemen, and man, does the world just not respect both of you? And so once again, we're very grateful for you to be here.
Oh, thank you for the kind words.
Thank you.
Well, why don't we start with you, Marvin, to make this easy? Because, I get an email recently. It's this big PR blast from a lady named Ainsley. And basically what it says is, my goodness, Marvin the Weasel Elkind is doing a book signing. And George is going to hop on with you because you have a book out, and it's called The Weasel, A Double Life in the Mob. Double Life in the Mob. You drove for Jimmy Hoffa?
Yes, I did. 4 years.
4 years for Jimmy Hoffa. Why don't you take us through? You're both Toronto kids, and we're going to start with you, Marvin. You're born in Toronto. I just want to start right from the age around 9, okay? We're Marvin Elkind. We're 9 years old. What is happening in your time during that time?
I was having a lot of trouble at home with my stepfather, and Children's Aid decided that I should be moved out of the house, and I was moved into a foster home. And I was there for 2 years and got into trouble. When I was 11, I got sentenced to 5 years at Bowmanville Boys Reform School.
They actually called it a sentencing when you go to reform. Like it's...
It was by a judge.
Yeah.
And I was there I was sentenced to 5. I only served 4. I got 1 year out in parole. And then when I was 18, I moved with 2 of my foster brothers to New York. I got a job as a busboy at the Copacabana. And while I was at the Copacabana, they offered me the job. It came like this, actually. You had to be in the Teamsters Union to work at the Copacabana. And one day I got called over to the table by a group. It was Tony Salerno, Tony Provenzano, Blinky Palermo, and Frankie Carbo, all mob guys. And they called me over. And they said, it was a Wednesday. Friday's your last day here. I said, why? I'm trying so hard to do a good job. He says, yeah, we know that, but as of Monday, you're going to be Mr. Hoffa's driver. I says, I'm going to be what? They said, you're going to be Hoffa's driver. I says, I don't want to be Hoffa's driver. They said, nobody's asking you.
I would have ran. I still. So you get nominated.
Well, I told him this. I said, I don't know the streets. I'm from Toronto. They said, you'll learn them. You only go to the same places. I said, yeah, but I'm a Canadian. They said, that's the whole idea. They had conscription in the States in those days, and Mr. Hoffa's driver was drafted into the Army. Me being a Canadian, they felt they didn't have to worry about that. So they got the job. They took me out Saturday. They bought me some blazers, sport shirts, slacks, coat and hat. Mr. Hoffa's drivers were not allowed to wear shirts and ties. You had to wear sport shirts because you wore this chain, this rope chain. It had to be visible. That showed you were his slave. So you couldn't wear shirts and ties. You just wear sport shirts. And Mr. Hoffa, being a very strong family man, every weekend, Friday night, he would fly back to his family in Chicago, be there for the weekend, and come back to New York on Monday. So at this time, he was in Chicago. They took me to the airport to show me where I would pick up Mr. Hoffa Monday morning. And Sunday, I was scared to death. I phoned home, and I asked my mother, I said, can I please come home? And she said, no. Your stepfather doesn't want you here. And then everybody will say that you were a coward. You thought you could go and do it on your own, and you couldn't. So she says, give it a shot. I said, all right. Monday morning, I took the car that they gave me, and I drove to the airport to LaGuardia. And I drove where I was supposed to. Out from a certain spot comes Mr. Jimmy Hoffa. I pull up the car and I get out and I says, "Good morning, Mr. Hoffa." He says, "Are you Marvin?" I goes, "Yes, sir." He says, "Good start, a very good start. Remember that. Mr. Hoffa or sir. Remember that. One of the two." I says, "Yes, sir." Get in the car. He says, "Now drive over there." Tells me where to drive. He says, "Now, two guys come out." His bodyguards, they get into the car. He says, "Marvin, turn the car off." I turn it off. He goes, "Now turn it around." I turn around. He says, "Boys, show Marvin." They open up their jackets to show me that they're carrying guns. He says, "Now listen, Marvin, I have rules and I have cardinal rules. You break a rule, won't be too serious. The boys will just beat you up. You break a cardinal rule, you won't be around the next morning." He says, "The rules are this. I don't want to hear a snowstorm, thunderstorm, rainstorm. I don't want to hear that. You must never be late when you're picking me up. After you pick me up, if you're late because of circumstances, that's okay. But I must not be kept waiting. You must not be late." I was with him for 4 years. Most of the time I was an hour early, but I was never late. Then he says, "Here's the cardinal rules. I expect 100% loyalty, 100% obedience, and what you hear in this car stays in this car." So I said, "Yes, sir." And then it worked out. They moved me into the Shays, the Lowe's Downtown Hotel. That's where Teamster headquarters were. Mr. Hoffa had an apartment there. Each of the two bodyguards had a room there, and I had a room there. One of my jobs to do was every morning at 6 o'clock, I would take that car. It could have been shining, could be a snowstorm, it didn't matter what. I had to take it around the corner and get that car washed and bugged. Had to get it washed. And by bugged, I mean we had somebody come over with a special machine to make sure nobody planted any bugs in the car so anybody could hear. And they'd be finished. 7 a.m., I would pull up to the Lowe's Midtown Hotel. Mr. Hoffa would come out with his bodyguards, and the day would start. And I'd take him to his various meetings. Now, most of the time, he had lunch at a place called Manny Wolf's. Manny Wolf's in New York in those days, but if you wanted to buy a hot watch, that's where you went. You want to sell a hot watch, that's where you went. You want somebody beaten up, that's where you went. And the police had it hands off. And Mr. Hoffa, of course, was treated fantastic there. They didn't know what to do with him. And 99% of the time, I was allowed to have dinner, to sit down or lunch or breakfast, whatever he was having, with him and whoever he was with. There were other times he used to tell me, sit at another table, which, of course, I would do. And I felt like I got used to it. I saw that if as long as I do what I'm supposed to do, the big thing with him was that to be responsible. That if I say I'm going to be there at a certain time, be there. He was a very intimidating man, but he had two passions in life, his family and his union. He was a very moral man. Mr. Hoffa did not drink, he did not smoke, he did not womanize. At the end of the day, his associates used to hit the town because wherever they went, they didn't have to pay, and of course, people knew who they were, didn't know what to do for them. Not Mr. Hoffa. He used to say, "Marvin, 9 o'clock I'll be in the tub, then in bed, have the car around at 7 a.m. And that's the way he did it. Every Friday I would drive him in the evening to LaGuardia. He would go back to his family, and then I would pick him up again on Monday morning. Now, one incident I had with him, I was driving him, and he said, "Marvin," it was in August, "I hear that the high holidays, the Jewish high holidays are coming up soon." I goes, "That's true, Mr. Hoffa." He says, "Well, you'll definitely be home with your parents and your grandparents, your mother and your grandparents celebrating the holidays there." I says, "No, I won't." He says, "What do you mean you won't?" I says, "Well, I've already had my 2 weeks vacation, and the holidays altogether take a week, and then I haven't got the money to fly there." So he said, "What have you done with your money? You're a young boy. You get paid, truck drivers get paid. What have you done with your money?" I said, well, when you're in Chicago on the weekends, I have a girlfriend, and I take her to Coney Island and spend the weekends there with her. I said, so I had to buy a car. I said, a used car. It was good enough to do it Coney Island and back. I said, but I can't trust that car to take me to Toronto and back. So I won't be. She says, Marvin, I'll be very disappointed if you're not back in Toronto with your family celebrating those high holidays with them. I take them to the airport. I go back to Teamster headquarters. And they say to me, Tony Salerno wants to see you. Tony Salerno was the liaison between the Mafia and the Teamsters. He had an office right next to Mr. Hoffa's. He wasn't an employee, he was an associate, and he was the liaison between the two. He was Don Vito Genevici's right-hand man. He called me into his office. He says, Marvin, tell my secretary, give her the dates of the Jewish high holidays. We're giving you an extra week's vacation with pay, and we're going to pay your way by plane there and back. I says, Jesus, fantastic. Why? Well, that's what Hoffa wants. I said, well, when did you speak to Mr. Hoffa? I just dropped him off at the airport. It was Marvin. They do have phones at the airport. So he was very good that way. When I got married, his wedding gift to myself and my bride, he said, what are you doing for your honeymoon? I said, we're going to Niagara Falls. He paid for a round trip for us to Miami, paid for a hotel for us at the Delita Hotel, got us some nightclub tours, and paid for all our meals. That was his wedding gift to us.
So he had immense respect for you, and from what I understand, obviously you had this very tough childhood. You go to reform school. You grew up with a bunch of bullies. Everyone in your life taught you to be tough, and you never were ever acted like a coward. Mm-hmm. You always showed such courageous spirit, and you always showed such loyalty. At what point was it when you, Marvin the Weasel Elkind, decided to go, you know what, I've been on this sort of dark side, and I've for some reason got this X on my back that tough people in this world have always been attracted to me. At what point did you decide, you know what, maybe it's time to be a bit of an informant, to tell people what I'm really seeing behind closed doors?
I was driving I was back in Toronto at the time. I came back to Toronto in '56. And I was driving for quite a bit for a guy called Neil Cameron Proverbs, who was probably one of the best con men the world ever had out. And he took one of the wealthiest families in the city for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he got arrested. But then his son-in-law at that time, Mr. Joe Tenenbaum, who he took for the money. His son-in-law was Bobby Kaplan, Solicitor General of Canada, and they told him if he goes to court, he'll be implicated in doing crooked things for Neil Proverbs. So the charges were dropped to a simple gun charge. I found out that all the interviews that Neil Proverbs had with the coppers, he had them all videoed and taped. And he had ones of me videoed and taped, shoot my big mouth off, telling him all sorts of stories.
Wow.
He showed them to me. I spoke to my lawyer. My lawyer was a fantastic lawyer, close friend of mine since I was a kid, and then he became a judge. He just passed away not long ago, Harvey Salem. Neil went to Harvey to represent him. I said to Harvey, I said, what should I do? He says, get out of town. Get out of the province, out of the country if you can, while this is going on.
And out of my office right now.
So I had a friend of mine that had a siding company in Calgary. I called him and he said, all right, come on down. I'll get you a place to stay and you can work here. So I went to Calgary. Now the trial goes on with Neil Proverbs. And it's in the papers every day. I'm reading it every day, feeling I'm nice and secure here in Calgary. They asked him how he met the police officers. He says he met them through Marvin Elkind. These are officers that I knew, that I was friendly with from the coppers, from the boxing. I was not a fink at that time. Then one day there's a knock on my hotel door in Calgary, Calgary police. Marvin Elkind, yes, you're under arrest. I said, why? We don't know. I said, you don't know? He goes, no. He says, all we know is that it's a Canada-wide warrant out for you from Ontario. We have to take you in.
And they found you before the days of Google Maps and stuff. That's pretty.
What happened was I found out they were tolling my calls. Tolling the calls. They didn't need a warrant. They weren't listening to them, but they were searching where calls were coming in to my wife. And they found them coming in from the hotel I was staying at in Calgary, and that's when they got me. Anyway, they brought me back and I was in jail there for a couple of days. The Ontario Provincial Police came to Calgary, brought me back. It took me to OPP headquarters, which in those days was on the lakeshore. And the arresting officer, Superintendent Savage, takes me into the room where they show all the porno movies. He says, Marvin, we're going to go to the movies, but nobody's holding your hand. Now they got me on video. They're showing me the videos. Wow. Shooting my big, stupid mouth off. Just telling things to Proverbs that were true. Telling things to Proverbs that were lies. Just to impress him. And I'm talking and talking. When it was over, Superintendent Savage says to me, what do you think? I says, that actor looks an awful lot like me.
Get him an Oscar.
So he says, listen, phone your lawyer. We've been talking to him. I said, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. He says, he'll expect the call. I phoned my lawyer at home. He says, where are you? I says, I'm in Toronto. He says, they came and got you. I go, yeah, they got me. I said, what do I do? He says, you cooperate. They've got you by the throat. Whatever you can do to save yourself, you save yourself. He says, they've got you on tape. It's true, not true, it doesn't matter, but you're in big trouble. So I put down the phone and I turned to the superintendent and I says, give me a sweater and a number and put me on the team. Now, when I had to testify, they brought in to cross-examine me. Proverbs hired the #1 defense lawyer in Canada, David Humphreys, and he cross-examined me. And it was a sideshow. I get on the stand, and it was 11:45, and he says to the judge, Hugh Locke, he says, I want to study his statements. He says, well, it's 11:45. He says, we'll break for lunch till 2 o'clock. Mr. Elkind, remember you're still under oath, and you must not discuss this with anybody.
What'd you have for lunch?
I had for lunch. I went down the street to the Sheraton Center Hotel. I had 2 chicken sandwiches and 2 vodka martinis on the rocks.
Of course.
I come back to court. I'm on my way. A lawyer by the name of Doug Lissaman, that later on became a judge, says, everybody is talking that you're going to be cross-examined by Humphreys. I was right. He says, Marvin, let me tell you something. Humphreys is going to ask you a lot of stuff. Nothing to do with the case. Just things that you did years ago that were wrong. Just to make you look bad to the jury. Make you look bad. Ruin your credibility. And everything that he asks you, he's going to have the truth behind his back. Lie once and you're finished. He says, everybody knows who you are anyway and what you are anyway. Don't lie. He says, because if you lie, you're through. I says, thank you. I went to court. I started. Chief Humphreys asked me, he says, Mr. Elkind, in such a year, did you do this? I go, yes, I did. Another man, he says, well, did you do this? I go, yeah, I did that. He hits me again. He says, yeah, that was me. I did. Finally, he says to me, what were you telling all these stories that we saw on video to Proverbs? I goes, lies, all lies. Everything I was telling was lies. He says, why were you lying? I says, I wasn't under oath. It wasn't a courtroom. He's not a cop. He's a mobster. I felt like lying to him. Plus the fact I said by lying to him, it got him to give me a few more bucks. So that's why I did it. She says, when you were lying to Proverbs, how'd you feel? I says, I felt terrific. He says, why? I says, I was drunk. So he says to me, so he says, well, the devil made you do it, eh? I says, well, your client bought me the drinks. You want to call him the devil? That's up to you. Now, I was on the stand, and it went like this. He was asking me these questions. Now I'm feeling good. He says to me, now, how did this happen? I says, it happened this way, Dave. He goes, don't call me Dave. I said, why'd you change your name? Now he's talking to me about me and Proverbs. I says, listen, counselor, you know, Proverbs and I are basically the same. We're both con men. There's only one big difference. He shoots for millions, and I'm a nickel and dimer. He says, are you saying he's better than you? I says, well, is every lawyer a Dave Humphreys? Finally, he's had enough.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm through with this man. When I went back into the room, the cops hugged me. They were so thrilled the way it went. Next day in the Toronto Daily Star, headlines, rapid speaking Elkind beats Humphreys to the punch every time.
Wow.